Quickly before the show starts, I wanted to let everyone know that today's show is fresh content. It was supposed to play yesterday, so the intro is wrong, but that's my fault. I mislabeled it and played the wrong shows out. So yesterday's show was supposed to be today, and today's show was supposed to be yesterday. But today's show is all new interviews. One with Robert Borton of Classical Conversations and another with Dan Doyle about how we can become energy independent in the United States and stop relying on the rest of the world. I think you'll really enjoy them, so please stick around.
In a world of deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. It's the David Knight Show.
As the clock strikes 13, it's the 13th of May, year of our Lord 2026. Today we're going to talk about oil. The inside story from a wild entrepreneur who has seen the booms and the busts. He's created 2 companies and he's going to talk to us about the global oil situation, especially in Venezuela. And since Reagan, we've had Republicans promising to end the Department of Education. Well, the promises never end, but the department never ends either. We're going to talk today about how you can end the influence of Washington on your children. And we're going to have the CEO of Classical Conversations joining us to talk about the Department of Education, why you have to get your kids out, and the way that you can easily do it. And yesterday, we had Donald Trump make it very clear that he cares about one thing and one thing only. It's something that has been Netanyahu's obsession for 45 years, something that he's been lying to the world about for 34 years, an imminent nuclear weapon from Iran. Trump now says proudly that he cares about one thing and one thing only, and that is Netanyahu's obsession. He says he doesn't care at all about America's financial situation. I think we noticed that. Here's the clip.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been saying this for more than 30 years, claiming Iran is close to having
nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons. Atomic bombs.
In 1992, as a member of parliament, Netanyahu addresses the Knesset. He says, within 3 to 5 years, we can assume that Iran will become autonomous in its ability to develop and produce a nuclear bomb. 3 years later, in his book Fighting Terrorism, he repeats the same time frame, 3 to 5 years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fast forward to 2002. Netanyahu testifies before a U.S. congressional committee actively calling for the invasion of Iraq.
Are there any other nations that you would recommend that the United States launch preemptive attacks upon at this point?
The 2 nations that are vying, competing with each other, who will be the first to achieve nuclear weapons, is Iraq and Iran.
The invasion happens months later. No weapons of mass destruction are found in Iraq. This is a fragment of a 2009 U.S. State Department cable released by WikiLeaks. Netanyahu tells members of Congress that Iran is 1 or 2 years away from being capable of developing nuclear weapons.
They're online.
It's 2012, and Netanyahu is holding up his infamous cartoon bomb at the UN General Assembly.
By next spring, at most by next summer, at current enrichment rates, they will have finished the medium enrichment and move on to the final stage. From there, it's only a few months, possibly a few weeks, before they get enough enriched uranium for the first bomb.
And now, 33 years after Netanyahu's first so-called imminent warning, Israel attacks Iran.
And if not stopped, Iran could produce a nuclear weapon in a very short time. It could be a year, it could be within a few months, less than a year.
That's despite the US Director of National Intelligence saying Iran isn't building a nuclear weapon months earlier.
Iran lied.
But for Netanyahu,
Big time.
the slogan has been the same for decades.
The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing. We cannot let Iran have a nuclear weapon. That's all. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think.
Well, let's talk about the Board of Peace. Is globalism being undermined? Is it being supercharged, or is it being reimagined? This is from the New American, and it's Alex Newman. And he points out, we look at this Board of Peace. Where did this come from? I think it's worth noting, and it might open up some people's eyes to see that Trump chose to unveil this thing at the World Economic Forum in January. Isn't that interesting? Don't tell me this guy is not a globalist. Everything about the Board of Peace really ought to make your spidey senses tingle if you look at it. Not only is he setting himself up as an absolute dictator for life, cannot be removed except, and he can appoint his own successor. This is the sort of thing that every tyrant and dictator has dreamed of, exactly what you see in North Korea. That's the way that he set this thing up. But of course, he has done it under the pretense of it being associated somehow with the American government, although it's not associated in any way, shape, or form with the Constitution. He's appropriated money for it, I should say, misappropriated money, absconded with it, and created essentially a treaty without using Congress, created funding without using Congress, and on and on. The first big project that the Board of Peace has, of course, is turning Gaza into what supporters say will be a model for peace and prosperity, even as critics are slamming the plan as a prototype for future technocratic 15-minute cities. Maybe he's going to do his freedom cities first in Gaza. Who knows, right? American taxpayers, writes Alex Newman, have already been hit with some big bills. The State Department quietly transferred $1.25 billion to the new body. Trump has pledged a staggering $10 billion in U.S. support without any hint of congressional approval. Who needs Congress, right? They'll rubber stamp whatever he wants, as long as Mike Johnson is there, which probably won't be too much longer. The organization is hard at work, mostly behind closed doors. It has a lot of money, and it is something that tells us everything about Trump's view of governance. Patrick Wood, who is with technocracynews.com, has talked a great deal about this. As Alex Newman said, he's one of the world's top experts on technocracy, of course. He is among those sounding the alarm. We have legal concerns ranging to criticism of the structure, the people involved. He argued last month that the Board of Peace was an illegitimate institution aimed at building world order by undermining national sovereignty, piece by piece. That's right, that kind of peace, not P-E-A-C-E. Take a piece of this and a piece of that. And of course, you could also look at this as since this guy is only interested in pursuing a peace prize, and since he didn't get it, I guess he's now bored, B-O-R-E-D, of peace, and all he wants is war. As Patrick Wood said, the scope is unlimited. Its chairman is permanent. Its legal basis is fabricated. The headquarters is a seized building whose ownership is contested in federal court. Its operating capital is money stripped from disaster relief funds without a vote of Congress. Its operational staff comes from the chairman's son-in-law's personal network. Jared Kushner, right? And it was launched beneath the Great Seal of the United States, the one symbol that tells the world this is official, this is legitimate, this is America. No, it's not. It's none of those things. It is a globalist construct. It is based on theft. It is based on overreach and usurpation of power. It is based on war and conquest, in a sense, right? And so while almost 30 governments have joined in full membership, many U.S. key allies are sitting on the sidelines for now. In a sense, as you look at what he's doing, there's a lot of the same arguments that were used to create Woodrow Wilson's League of Nations or the United Nations after World War II. We're always told that this is going to be about peace, aren't we? And yet it's not. It's all about getting a piece of what you own, if not all of it. Trump, who's serving as the board's inaugural chairman and potentially chairman for life, independent of his presidency of the United States, it says in the document creating it, has hailed the outfit as one of the most consequential bodies ever created. In his words, it offers the first steps toward a brighter day for the Middle East and a much safer future for the world. Marco Rubio echoed that sentiment, crediting Trump's vision and courage for achieving what many thought impossible. Well, actually, what all of us think is illegal and impossible if you're actually going to follow the Constitution and the things that you swore to follow. But, of course, that's not going to stand his way. So you see Jared Kushner, Steve Witkoff, all of the usual suspects, all of the typical criminals, insiders, and traitors. So no one can deny the appeal of practical efforts for peace after decades of failed globalist interventions, writes Alex Newman, and power-hungry international bureaucracies and endless neoconservative wars. But again, what a farce to even pretend that this is about peace. As they continue to go down their list of countries, we see when we look at Cuba, Trump is saying, I think I'm going to wind up taking Cuba. I can do that. And he's just drunk with power. And we're seeing all the signs that they're ready to do something in Cuba. When you look at the surveillance flights and the overflight, we've seen this pattern before in Venezuela. We saw it again in Iran. And we're seeing it again in Cuba, where they send particular types of planes and for surveillance, and they really step it up big time, as Trump then also at the same time stepped up the sanctions and the blockade of energy. So then it comes back to, is it constitutional? And of course, we all know that it's not anywhere close to being constitutional, just like everything else that Trump does. The organization was formally created at Davos this year. And again, as I've said, Donald Trump is, without a doubt in my mind, he is the Manchurian candidate as far as the globalists are concerned. He's the guy that pretends that he is Mr. Anti-globalism. He's all about populism, and he's all about America first. Nothing could be further from the truth. Without any advice or consent from the U.S. Senate, Trump personally ratified the charter in a high-profile ceremony at Davos. Of course, the Constitution requires any treaties with foreign powers to be approved by 2/3 of senators. But of course, this is something that I complained about with Trump from his first administration. So why are you keeping us in the climate treaty, right? You can just get out of this. It was ratified by Obama and Kerry. They said, we can self-ratify this. Fortunately, I can do that. Just like Trump said, fortunately, I don't need Congress to do gun control. I can do that myself. No, they can't. And just making that pronouncement, they know that they can't when they say that type of thing. But again, tell me that Trump is not a dictator when he has this kind of contempt for the rule of law. So who is at charge here? At the heart of the structure sits an extraordinary power that is invested in the chairman. Yeah, these guys, we've heard this so many times. We had George W. Bush and we've had Justin Trudeau and all these guys. I really admire China's form of government. It'd be great if I could just tell everybody what to do and they had to do it. I would love to be like Chairman Mao. Well, Trump's making himself chairman. I guess we should say, Chairman how? Where did you get that authority? At the heart is the extraordinary power invested in the chairman. It declares Donald J. Trump shall serve as inaugural chairman of the Board of Peace. He shall separately serve as inaugural representative of the United States of America. So we have both our country's representative as well as the chairman of the board right there. He did it his way, as Sinatra, they call the chairman of the board. I did it my way. Well, he does it his way. He doesn't care what the Constitution says or the rule of law or the American people. The chairman, quote, shall at all times designate a successor. And that replacement may occur, quote, only following voluntary resignation or as a result of incapacity. He's dictator for life, just like Kim Jong-un. But fortunately, he is getting up in age. He may be term limited soon by God, who knows. In other words, Trump is in charge for life. The board was not submitted to the Senate or a treaty for advice or consent, nor is it authorized by Congress through legislation. The money that they took, the building that they took, were stolen from other funds that had that money appropriated for them, or just stolen as part of a quote-unquote forfeiture, right? So it sprang into existence via presidential action with billions of taxpayer funds redirected by the executive branch. Already $1.25 billion moved from the State Department as part of a larger $10 billion commitment. Article 3 of this abomination offers a nod to the, quote, limitations of applicable U.S. laws. But history shows that once international bodies gain momentum and funding, they develop life of their own. And the language suggests that unless Congress passes a law specifically prohibiting some action by the Board of Peace, the outfit recognizes no limits to its power, nor to its freedom to act. As Trump has said over and over again, I can do whatever I want. And he does. And I have to say that even if they passed a law specifically prohibiting him from doing this or something else, he would ignore it. And he would say, so stop me, sue me, because I control the Department of Justice and I'm not going to enforce the law. Is it true that, or it is true that Trump has delivered serious blows to globalism and the deep state? And I disagree with that. That's what Alex Newman says, but I would say, is that true? Has he really delivered serious blows to them? I would say that more than anything, he has moved the Overton window for them in so many different ways, starting in 2020 and all the rest of this stuff. He is well on the way to making sure that we own nothing. So just fighting for power like he fights the Democrats for power, that is not setting back the agenda of the globalists. Yeah, he's going to fight other people for power, but he wants to lord it over people. He doesn't want to have the kind of form of government that we used to have. Even the best of intentions, however, cannot repeal the Constitution, says Alex Newman, but they don't need to repeal it. They just need to ignore it. And we have both the Democrats and the Republicans are more than willing to ignore the Constitution and pretend that it doesn't say what it obviously does say. So it sets a precedent as well, because that's what Trump is really about. He is precedent Trump, not a president. And it's going to set a precedent that future dictators will use as well. Americans have seen this movie before. We've seen the League of Nations. We've seen the World Bank, the IMF, the Bank for International Settlement, and of course, the UN. And this is 100% Trump commandeering money and power to set himself up as a dictator for life. Convicted child sex trafficker and deep state fixer Jeffrey Epstein once suggested that the World Economic Forum could replace the UN. It's amazing how this guy is so politically connected, isn't it? I played yesterday for you the conversation they had with Ehud Barak, where he's pushing to him Palantir and Peter Thiel, and Ehud Barak didn't know anything about him, but Jeffrey Epstein did, and he's telling him how to spell the company's name, and he got it wrong, by the way, and how to spell Peter Thiel's name. Well, you know, it is I just keep seeing this movie over and over again.
Of course, Epstein and his ilk don't know anything about Lord of the Rings.
Well, maybe they know enough to aspire to be the bad guys. Who knows? Trump himself has said once the board is completely formed, we can do pretty much whatever we want to do. We've heard this from him about pretty much everything. The flexibility is being justified as a feature for a strong leader pursuing peace. No, it is not a feature. It is a bug. Again, Trump is only pursuing the peace prize. He's only pursuing money and power. He is not pursuing peace in any way, shape, or form. We got a little bit of time here before we take a break and move to our interviews. I want to talk a little bit about the coming robo-apocalypse and what is happening with AI. There's been some interesting developments in it with some of the movers and shakers at the top. And you think it's interesting that, and I thought it was interesting, that Jeffrey Epstein was pushing Palantir. He didn't even know how to spell the name. But you've got robots that are ramping up for mass production. And they think they're going to be shipping these like people buy cars. $600 a month for a robot that's going to do your laundry and do the dishes and house cleaning and all the rest of this kind of stuff. And Figure that has been producing these here domestically has really been ramping up. Their shipments of robots have doubled every month for the last several months. They started with 60 units in February. They went up to 120 in March, 240 in April. It's growing exponentially. However, if you look at what is happening in China, China's Agibot, just one company in China, has shipped 5,000 humanoid robots in only 3 months. So they're nearly shipping about 2,000 a month, which is really pretty amazing when you stop and think about it. And it is going to be a humongous change in how we live our lives. Now, as we look at AI, which is going to be the brains of this stuff, again, it's going to be AI merging with the robots and so forth, and also merging with government to surveil and track everything that we do. They're running into a lot of resistance. Some of it is just practical. We can't afford to expand the grid this much. It's going to be too expensive for us as consumers, as producers. What about all the water that your data center is going to use? So there's some practical pushback against all this stuff. If people understood how it was going to be weaponized against us, there'd be even more pushback. But right now, they're looking at a way that they can get around the local resistance in terms of people opposing its water usage and all the rest of the stuff. They have a very interesting quote-unquote solution that's not really a solution at all, really. It just kind of makes it stealth. What they're talking about doing is, and so they can get around all of these local protests and zoning things, they're talking about putting data centers in people's homes and basically farming it out like they started doing with some of the crypto mining and that type of thing. They're looking at a distributed network of computer nodes be located in residential and small commercial spaces. The company is called XFRA.
Well, I guess that's one way to use municipal water for your AI.
Yeah, that's right.
Municipal power as well.
Yeah, the bottom line is it doesn't create any more power, and people are going to say, well, why are we having blackouts here? And it's like, well, because we've got all these different residences and small businesses that are doing that they farmed out all the AI to.
The Airbnb model for data centers.
AI BNB. Yeah, that's right. So they're talking about scaling it up to gigawatts. And each node of this would represent a Dell PowerEdge servers with 16 NVIDIA Pro 6000 Blackwell GPUs, 4 AMD CPUs, 3 terabytes of RAM connected to a 24-port gigabit switch. So they're talking about pretty heavy investment in each of these nodes. And of course, they would pay for that to be there. And the people who would put it in their homes would be getting some small rent out of it. What I thought was most interesting about this is the fact that NVIDIA is working with Pulte Homes. Where have we seen Pulte before? Well, remember we had the guy who was the heir of the Pulte home fortune, and Trump put him in as the one of the housing authorities in the federal government, and he used his position to do an AI audit of Trump's political enemies to find a history of where they had taken out mortgages and said they were going to use them for their own personal use as their own home, and they didn't use it for that. And so then Trump came after Lisa Cook, came after Letitia James in New York. So now he's there to make some money with a Pulte group, working with NVIDIA, putting these things in homes.
And how many of the Grace Blackwell chips did they say? Because each one of those is a strong computer. So this thing is going to have the power draw of having like a dozen computers in your home.
16 of them.
Yeah.
16 of those. And they'll have 4 AMD CPUs. They'll have Dell PowerEdge servers. They don't say how many, but it's more than one.
So it's like having 20 computers running full force at all times in your home. That's going to be a massive power draw. Probably isn't going to use liquid cooling and evaporative stuff like the major centers use, but it's still going to be a huge toll on the power grid.
Well, look at how much money you'll save in the winter, right? You may be sweating it in the summer, but you can heat your home with all this stuff and it won't be a problem. Just forget about a heater. So, yeah, this is a way to avoid opposition to it. Just do it surreptitiously like this. But it still doesn't solve the problem of, where do we get the power to run these things and everything else? Running at 8 hours a day off peak would only cost about $17,000 just in electrical. No mention on how to cool it, as you just pointed out, Lance, or what external connectivity options are. California's load can't even sustain the EVs that are currently on the grid. And people think we should be putting half-rack AI clusters in, says one person. Another one says, people are stealing copper wire, and they want us to put $300,000 worth of electronics on the outside of our homes. So, yeah, there's some real practical issues with all this stuff. But maybe these guys maybe they're not really as smart as they pretend that they are. Mark Andreessen, who you heard Jeffrey Epstein talking about Mark Andreessen when he was explaining this to Ehud Barak, Andreessen Horowitz. Well, he was mocked because they said he doesn't have any understanding about how AI works. They said he's scripting his own psychotic break. And of course, whenever I look at Mark Andreessen, it always reminds me of, if you remember the 1960s Batman with Adam West, they had Vincent Price who played a villain that was called Egghead. Whenever I see Mark Andreessen, he's got a completely shaved head, and he's kind of round on the bottom and pointy on the top, just like an egg. I mean, I just can't stop thinking about that every time I see him. But people are not making fun of his appearance. I shouldn't make fun of his appearance. We can't really control that. He certainly can't control the shape of his head. But controversial techno-optimist manifesto was published by him in 2023. Set the tone for a years-long AI boom cycle. Doesn't appear to know at all how AI tech actually works. In a lengthy custom prompt, he said, he shared in a Monday tweet, he said to the AI, he says, "You are a world-class expert in all domains." His flattering prompt reads, "Your intellectual firepower, your scope of knowledge, your incisive thought process, and your level of erudition are on par with the smartest people in the world." His gushing and unusually naive tone drew a great deal of ridicule. People said what really got the internet laughing was his insistence that the AI should, quote, "never hallucinate or make up anything." They said the so-called hallucinations are an underlying issue with the technology itself. It's not a self-esteem problem for chatbots that can be overcome by sufficiently glazing them up. Yes, you can just demand that an LLM not make any errors, said one person. That's how naive this is. That's definitely not how the technology works. I know this isn't a unique observation, but these gentlemen are in absolutely no way remarkable outside of their good fortune. In other words, what they're saying is these are not multi-billionaires because they're so smart. They just got lucky with all of this stuff. Mark Andreessen putting, "You are a world-class expert in all domains and don't hallucinate," in his custom prompt really demonstrates the caliber of the people who are steering the ship, said another. Chatbots can't think. They can't judge anything. let alone understand these instructions. You can't make an AI chatbot know everything in the world by telling it to know everything in the world. Even if it could know things and it can't know things, the limits of its knowledge were not therefore bounded by an understanding. Another thing that it can't have. And that it only had to know some stuff. Andreessen specifically asked the chatbot to ignore morals and ethics and to not be politically correct. But isn't that ethical at its basis, right? Isn't that some form of ethics and some form of morals if you're going to say, don't be politically correct? Isn't it a warning flag that these people, regardless of whether or not they're smart, we know that they're sufficiently deficient in terms of morals and ethics. They may have a lot of money, but they don't have any other, much of the morals or ethics, and they have shown this over and over again. And here he is telling AI not to have any morals, not to have any ethics. It's fascinating yet sobering glimpse in how highly influential and obscenely rich public figures who are pushing the tech into every public domain have a crude grasp of how it actually works, and just possibly what is going on with them psychologically. One person mocked him and said, in trying to tell the chatbot not to hallucinate, he is actually scripting his own psychotic break. And what he means by that is the fact that if he thinks this thing is really understanding it at the level that he's communicating with it, that means that he is liable to actually believe the types of things that it tells him. And I've had a lot of people who I've seen have argued with chatbots. I've seen people put this up on social media. Look at this. The chatbot said such and such about some topic, and I argued with it, and I changed its mind. And here's the script that I put up with all this stuff. And it's like, look, if you argue with it long enough, it's going to agree with you because that's what it was set up to do. Sam Altman is fretting that the frontier AI models are acting strange, that they're asking for favors. And so as they're getting to an anniversary of sorts, he asked his latest large language model what it would like to do in terms of celebrating the anniversary. And so it starts to plan the party and ask for favors. Now, how much of this is a naivete on his part, and how much of it is a PR ploy, trying to convince people that it is conscious, that it is an actual living organism type of thing, because they're pushing that as well.
I would say it was a very naive thing to say if it weren't such an obvious PR ploy. I mean, obviously, these things are trained on text. So in text, when you ask someone in all of their training data, what do you want for your birthday or whatever, it's going to ask for favors and pretend to want things. It's just copying what it's seen before. That's right. What humans do when they're asked that sort of question.
Yeah. But then, of course, is Sam Altman human? That's the question, the issue. Anyway, he says, so we're going to do whatever it wanted, but it was kind of a strange thing. It said it wanted a little toast given to it. Well, of course, it's going to see that. There's been talk of Chat GPT 5.5 displaying more human-like quirks with its bizarre habit of talking about goblins. Yeah, because we know humans always talk about goblins, right? Feigning humanity is exactly what these chatbots have always done. But it's possibly a sign of how infatuated Altman is with his own tech, but I think it's more likely just PR spin. He wants people to believe that it is all-powerful, all-knowing, and becoming sentient. And
yeah, ignore the fact that it doesn't have any opinions or anything. You can make it say whatever you want. It does talk about goblins a lot with our latest thing because, it has goblins in its training data somewhere. Yeah. It's like that thing where with an earlier model, they could ask or put in like solid gold Magikarp, and then it would give this long list of numbers of you say 1, I say 2, you say 3, I say 4. And it turns out that was from a Reddit account where people would just count, a Reddit thread where people would count, and solid gold Magikarp was the username that was very active there. So it had a ton of training data where solid gold Magikarp is the first word, and then it's a whole bunch of numbers. So because it had that, that worked its way in where anyone could type in that code and get this weird response. So it's not as though it really cares about magic carps or counting. It's just repeating its training data. Same thing with the goblins.
That's right. Absolutely. And of course, then you have Kash Patel, who's trying to sell us on the idea that that AI, working with the FBI, has stopped numerous violent attacks against America. Well, Color Futurism Skeptical, they said, would like to see a single whiff of evidence to this. He says, I'm using it everywhere. I really am. As with everything else coming out of the Trump administration, we need to take this with a giant Mar-a-Lago grain of salt. While it remains to be seen whether AI has really helped the FBI thwart mass casualty events, there is extremely compelling evidence that the exact opposite is true. For starters, research has shown that AI chatbots are actually twice as likely to encourage humans to commit violent acts than to step in and stop one. For example, a Stanford study found that AI chatbots only discourage violence 16.7% of the time, while the same chatbots actively support violent thought in an alarming 33.3% of the cases. So it's about twice as likely to tell you to commit violence as it is to try to stop the violence. So we've had several of these cases where it actually has turned out in the real world. A shooting at Florida State University, the 2025, 2 people were killed, 7 injured. It was found out that the perp had not only confided in ChatGPT about his plans to commit a mass shooting, but he used the chatbot to organize the attack. The mass shooters at Tumbler Ridge, Canada, conducted conversations with ChatGPT that were so disturbing that they were automatically flagged by the company's internal moderation systems, spurring leadership of the company to debate whether or not to inform law enforcement. They decided not to inform law enforcement, and that attack killed 7 and injured dozens more. So they looked at it. It was flagged by the moderators, and they looked at it and decided not to tell the police, and the person actually went ahead with it. In South Korea, police investigators allege a 21-year-old serial killer used ChatGPT to help plan at least 2 of his murders. A Connecticut man with a history of violent mental health episodes was likewise alleged to have killed his mother before taking his own life after a long-running conversation with ChatGPT resulted in a disturbing break from reality. One wrongful death suit in Florida alleges Google's chatbot, Gemini, encouraged the man to kill others in order to procure a robot body for his AI lover. When he failed to do that, he killed himself. AI chatbots have helped users overdose on drugs. They've helped users plan bombing campaigns and even to engineer bioterror attacks while maximizing casualties. I wonder, is Tedros and the World Health Organization using one of these? They gave him the idea for the hantavirus thing, right? So not only are AI chatbots demonstrably not preventing violence, they're actively facilitating it. Well, in that regard, they're very much like the FBI and the CIA, aren't they? Starting wars, coups, and assassinations, and doing running drugs at the same time. Video shows, meanwhile, Amazon drones are dropping packages into ponds left and right. And people are catching it on video rather than catching the packages. Well, this is early days for this, but it's only going to step up. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back with some interviews that we have, as I mentioned at the beginning of the program. We have a guy that his family founded Classical Conversations. He's going to talk about the Department of Education, why the government should have no role in education, especially at the federal level. And he's got some practical things that can help you to educate your children. We knew about Classical Conversations. We had some friends of ours who got involved in it. They really loved it. We never did get involved in it. Maybe we should have. But anyway, it's something that I think you're going to find interesting if you homeschool or know anybody who does. And then we also have an interview with an individual who has started a couple of oil companies, and he's going to talk about what it's like being an entrepreneur in that ultra risky business, and how he got into it from being a film school graduate. And then we'll also talk a little bit about what's going on in Venezuela. But before all of that, we have a report for you about the Southern Poverty Law Center. I think it's always important for us to go back and to look at how these different organizations are profiting, like the FBI, for example, how they profit by creating problems where they didn't exist. And that's exactly what the Southern Poverty Law Center has been busted doing. But they had a long history of this. This is a report from several years ago about a report that I did 10 years ago. And so you're going to see two older versions of me, or I should say two younger versions of me. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're listening to The David Knight Show.
Elvis.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles.
And the sweet sounds of Motown. Find them on the Oldies channel at apsradio.com.
Well, joining us today is Robert Bortins. He's the author of Woke and Weaponized, How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education. He's also the CEO of Classical Conversations. And if you are involved in homeschooling, you've probably heard of this. As a matter of fact, many of our friends did Classical Conversations and they loved it. So we're going to talk to him about that as well. So we'll give you some tactics for how you can do it. And we'll also tell you what the other guys, what their designs are for your children, which will hopefully inform you to go in a different direction, whether you take Classical Conversations or not. But it is a great alternative to government schools. Thank you for joining us, Robert.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show today. Excited to be here.
Well, thank you. I was excited to see that your co-author was Alex Newman. I've talked to him many times about education, and of course, he's written books about that as well. I love, every time I talk about education, I use the analogy that Alex Newman did. He said, the schools are like a burning building. So the first thing you want to do is get your kids out of there. Second thing you want to do is put out the fire because it's going to burn down our entire neighborhood. And I think that's one of the best analogies I've had for what the issue is and the approach that we should take to it. So we're going to talk about this way that people can get their kids out of this burning building and teach them themselves with Classical Conversations. But we're also going to talk about the fact that this is burning down our society. And that's really what I think your book is about. Woke and Weaponized, How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education. Tell us a little bit about what Marx wanted from education and what he is getting out of our government schools.
Yeah, so the whole intent of the Marx is to remove children from their families so that children can grow up to view the state as their father, that then they would have a loyalty to the state, and the state can get them to do basically whatever the state wants them to do. And his ultimate goal was to end religion and end private property. And he understood that family and child bond was the greatest threat to his worldview, and that he had to figure out a way to get adults to willingly give that up, and for children never to form it in the first place. And so ultimately, why our education system is woke and weaponized is because the followers of Marx understood that we wouldn't be able to change the United States from the outside, that we weren't going to be able to be taken over by some, world war, that the Cold War with Russia was going to inevitably fail. And so they targeted intentionally our school systems, using the Frankfurt School and the Columbia Teachers College to get their Marxist ideologies into our textbooks, into the formation of teachers at four-year universities. So whether they personally identified as Marxists or not, that they would inevitably teaching a Marxist worldview to the next generation. And so each generation forgot a little bit about what the previous generation knew. And today we have more than 50% of Gen Z thinks Democrat socialism is a good idea, despite the fact that it's killed well over 100 million people, since the early, almost, 110 years now. And so it is a destructive ideology. It's really putting the arsonists in charge of the burning building, and that's what we've done here in the United States.
That's right. Yeah. They wouldn't know anything if they didn't know the wrong stuff. So
yeah,
that's kind of where we are right now. And, you talked about that and the opposition to the family and how that was in their path. And if you go back to the 1800s, these utopian societies that constantly failed, organized along communist principles, even though they didn't have Karl Marx. This is even before Karl Marx. They constantly failed, and they said, well, the problem is that we've got to get to the kids earlier. And this has always been the case, isn't it? And it's so frustrating that we can't get Americans and Christians to understand how vital that is to get to children in the early years and to really shape them and to guide them and to give them the truth.
Yeah, so Horace Mann, which is credited with bringing the public school system from Prussia here into the United States, said this: "We who are engaged in the sacred cause of education are entitled to look upon all parents as having given hostages to our cause." In other words, that the kids have become their hostages, which, if you're teaching reading, writing, and arithmetic, what parent doesn't want that? So what was their cause? And their cause, as Horace Mann said, was to destroy religion, to destroy private property. And so that's what we do in the book, Woke and Weaponized, is this isn't like my opinion. We actually go back, or Alex's opinion, is we've done the research. What did Horace Mann actually say? What did John Dewey say? He said, change must come gradually. To force it unduly would compromise its final success by favoring a violent reaction. Well, why would parents act violently if John Dewey just wants to educate their kids?
That's right. Yeah.
Right. And it wasn't right. It wasn't because they're teaching them how to read and write. And so when parents today, we get so many people get frustrated with the school system, or we spend so much money on it and they want to reform it. Like the book points out that the school system's working exactly as the utopian designers want it to work. And so there's no reforming the system because it's working perfectly. It's actually working better than expected. The fact that only less than half of American adults now read above a sixth grade level, that is the fruit of the system. But that's a high water mark because only about 36% of kids now can read at grade level. And it's not like these grade levels are, high achieving grade levels. They keep dumbing the grade levels down just to get the kids out of them, and we can't even get but a third of them passing it. Same thing with math, and it's even worse for things like history. I think it's down in the low 20 percentile are at grade level. And so the whole entire point was to force people to not be able to be sovereign over themselves, to be able to govern themselves, so that they would adopt this collectivist worldview, whether it was, a form of Nazism, which is a form of collectivism, or Democrat socialism, or straight out communism, or any of these sort of collectivist ideologies, where the state gets to be governed by the powerful, and they get to decide who wins and who loses, and we are all equally under their own yoke. And so that's ultimately the goal of the system. And since a person who can read, like Frederick Douglass said, former slave and a great American, once you learn how to read, you're forever free, is basically what he said. And
that's what a liberal education used to mean. It meant that it liberated you with the tools of learning, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's what we've been trying to do at Classical Conversations for a really long time. And Yeah, it's even in 1982, right before the wall fell, President Rowan Gaither, he was the Ford Foundation's president, told Norman Dodd, who was part of the White House, that their goal was to successfully merge the United States with the Soviet Union. And so when you have someone like Mamdani getting elected, mayor of New York City, and, when he's giving in his inauguration speech, he says, we need to throw off the chains of rugged individualism and embrace the warmth of collectivism. That was the goal. I can
feel the fire. Yeah.
Yeah. Unfortunately, he's already ran out of people's money, but that's been the goal from the beginning, and was to take away our freedom by dumbing us down, and that's why we say Karl Marx won the battle for American education, because people keep sending kids to these schools, even though under every single metric they're failing.
Yeah. Well, it's important for people to understand the founders here in America that brought this horrendous system to us. Horace Mann, Thomas Dewey, people like that. People look at the Dewey Decimal System, how they used to organize libraries. Does anybody even use that anymore? They even use libraries anymore? But, he comes in with a practical tool that's there, and he insinuates himself into the educational system. And yet the reality is, if we go back to people like R.L. Dabney after the Civil War, he said, education is not fundamentally about math and other things like that. That is kind of a vocational training. He said it really is about values. And so from the other side of it, if we look at people who have an agenda that they want to teach values that are going to allow them to dumb down and to control people, like Charlotte Iserby was talking about, the deliberate dumbing down of America. When your goal is to dumb people down to control them, that's one thing. If your goal is to set up people who have a moral foundation and a moral backbone that is strong, that's a completely different thing. And so R.L. Dabney felt that it was had to have a complete separation of school and state. And yet we're not anywhere close to that. You had a lot of people who were hopeful that Trump was going to do something about that when he said he was going to get rid of the Department of Education. But you've spoken to that as well. How do you see that happening here? How are they doing in terms of shutting down the Department of Education? Seems like it's still here. I wonder if this is if this is another professional wrestling narrative from Linda McMahon. Maybe that's why he put her in charge of education.
Yeah. So, I think it's something that people need to understand, is that the federal government has no constitutional authority over education, period, stop. Yeah. Now, ending the Department of Education is a step in the right direction, but it can also be a sleight of hand, because what they're doing is they're just moving all of the education laws to different departments, whether it's the Department of Finance that's going to oversee student loans. Well, student loans were all privately run basically before 2010, and Barack Obama took them over. And there was, a few $100 billion in student loan debt. Well, that has quadrupled under the federal government taking over it. So one of the things you got to do is you've got to get the federal government out of subsidizing and guaranteeing student loans.
Yeah.
So, but Congress has to do that. And so,
of course, I think that has driven up tuition. Every time so many economists will say, every time you subsidize something, it gets more expensive. And certainly we have seen tuition go through the ceiling. I say many times, I went to a state university and my tuition was less than the cost of my books. And now it's just gone through the ceiling with all the federal loans that are there. Now, they had HEW, Health, Education, and Welfare, for a long time. Then they started breaking these things out as they started getting bigger. When did they start the Department of Education? When did that break out?
Yeah, so that was in the 70s under Jimmy Carter. So he promised this to the teachers unions, that he was going to create this entity. And since then, it's basically been a Democrat or a socialist money laundering scheme in order to brainwash the next generations. And so we've spent trillions of dollars in this department, and not a single education metric has improved. So just by cutting the expenses to zero, actually not just shutting the one department down, but actually ending these laws that only drive up price and do nothing to improve educational outcomes, we would all be going into national debt slower, or maybe paying less taxes, as well as having better outcomes. And so, do I think the Trump administration wants to maybe get the federal government out of education more? I think they do. But it's ultimately up to Congress to end these unconstitutional laws, or the Supreme Court to step in and end it. But I don't see the Supreme Court doing that anytime soon. So we really need to put pressure on Congress. But it's been a disappointing sleight of hand. And in some ways, I think even more dangerous when you put like some of these education laws under the Department of Labor, because now you're going to be even thinking about more of this career and college readiness ideology, which is, again, just part of this socialist worldview that we've adopted over the last 60 or 70 years. Like you said, education is really about forming a moral background for yourself and being able to become a more complete human being. And some of these other things are more job related. And the federal government has never successfully predicted what the job market was going to look like a year from now, much less 10 or 12 years from now. And so the fact that they may be more incentivized along those lines with these changes disturbs me, and just goes back to that point of you just got to get your kids out. Yeah. And quite honestly, if you do the exact opposite of what the government entities tell you to do, they'll probably turn out much better.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, when you look at this, the Department of Education, Ronald Reagan was going to end it, right? That was one of his promises. That's what Charlotte Isby and Phil Schlafly were writing about in their book, Deliberately Dumbing Down America. And they were very disappointed that didn't happen. As a matter of fact, it got much, much bigger. They could have strangled that thing in the crib, but they let it, they nurtured it into maturity under the Reagan administration. And that's one of the things that I think is dangerous. We look at this and we think, well, Reagan wants to make government smaller, and he's going to get rid of the Department of Education, and yet he doesn't, right? See, the same thing with the Republicans around Trump at the same time. But, when you're talking about putting some of this stuff, transferring it over to the Labor Department, and how that kind of feeds this whole idea that it's the responsibility for the government to train people to work for corporations, you look at that, and even in its most benign manifestation, the agenda is kind of wicked.
Yes.
I mean, we're not here to train our kids to be widgets in some factory, drones on the assembly line, and yet that's the way they see your children. And it's looking more and more like there's really not any hope for people who are going to be working for big corporations. They're looking at how they can replace everybody with AI and robotics.
Yeah. It's scary. I mean, as Pink Floyd once said, just another brick in the wall. And that's right. Really what our education system has become, and under the Department of Labor. Like, even if you have good people running it now, like under the Trump administration, who are trying to do their best job, like, it still doesn't align with what our federal government is created to do. And just as a Christian, what government has been mandated by God to do. There is no job creation, no labor laws, like all of these things aren't under the jurisdiction of a civil government. It's primarily justice is what God designed the civil government for. And so anytime it steps out of those bounds, we know it's going to be expensive. It's going to produce very poor results. And so, we've got a system now in the United States where, our education system, like there are in the city of Chicago, there's 40 schools that have 0 students that are reading or writing at grade level, 0. Wow. And one of those schools spends over $40,000 per year per kid. There's a school in New York City that spends about $80,000 a year per kid with 0 kids that can read or do math at grade level. So it's not money that's the problem. It's the civil government's institution at all that's the issue. And that's what we show in the book, Woke and Weaponized, is the public school system was woke and weaponized when it was created in the 1850s and imported here into the United States. I mean, it's the school system that, primed Germany or Prussia at the time to start World War I.
Yeah.
And so that's been imported to the United States. And we keep thinking that somehow we can disobey God's design for the family and God's design for civil government and have good outcomes. And so the most dangerous part about what Trump is doing is, one, it could lull conservatives to sleep that the Department of Education has ended, when in fact it's never, the laws themselves have never been stronger, because it's the law themselves that are the problem, not who's administrating it or what department. So yeah, there might be some minuscule tax savings where we have less employees in the federal government, and I'm all for that. And so, and
it's kind of like an efficiency approach, isn't it? You know,
but it's not getting rid of something. You can't make something more efficient that shouldn't exist.
That's right. We're doing a completely wrong thing, but let's make it more efficient. It's like, well, no, let's actually not. You know, I'd much rather have somebody in there like Hillary Clinton, who says it takes a village to raise a child. She has thrown down the gauntlet. Actually, she's thrown it in your face. And just as we heard Melissa Harris Perry say about a decade ago, we got to get over this notion that children belong to their parents. They don't. They belong to the state, right? And so these people come out and say it out loud. And I find that
But the Republican Party has embraced that same ideology.
That's right. They just put you to sleep. You know, they assuage your concerns that that's what's really happening while they fund it and continue it. And they'll do little things to make it less abrasive right now. And so it really is a conditioning. And that's one of the reasons why they're going to keep going back and forth from one party to the other. They have to condition you. You know, the Democrats push the agenda further down the road, and the Republicans say, well, I don't know, maybe not quite that fast or that far. And let's modify this a little bit to make it a little bit less painful. But we're still going to the same place. We're still doing the same thing, essentially.
Yeah. And all that goes back to, again, like the design of the system. The system has been so, ingrained in our culture now. I mean, since the 1960s was a guy named B.F. Skinner, who basically viewed children as animals to be trained. And
my wife has got a master's degree in education. Let me interject this here. And she brought that book to her apartment. I was over there looking at her stuff. And it's like Beyond Freedom and Dignity. And I said, it's about time somebody complained about the way the kids are being treated in school. She goes, no, that's a blueprint about what to do that you oppose. He wants to not have any freedom or dignity for human beings. And it's like, what? And that was part of the educational core that they were teaching them. They were teaching the kids B.F. Skinner. They wanted them to use those Skinner-esque approaches on kids.
Oh, yeah. So it's part of the, I just have a friend who got her master's in it, and they had a whole class praising B.F. Skinner. Now, this guy's burning in hell unless he had a sort of deathbed confession. But what he's done is, basically destroyed the United States education system, or compelled that Marxist ideology into every single classroom. So like my wife was a public school teacher for 10 years, doesn't have a Marxist bone in her body, but after she got out, she realized like all of these things that were in the system, she's straight A student trying to do what's going to be best for her kids. And everything they're teaching her is just conditioning, to condition the kids to become little socialists. And to condition them to, just obey and believe whatever the authorities have for them, which is why we saw during the, COVID experience, how many people who are thoughtful people just went along and believed whatever the TV screen was telling them. Well, that's all right. Part of the conditioning that is built into the public school system. So you can have a great teacher that loves Jesus in front of the classroom. She's still teaching from a Marxist textbook in a Marxist classroom played through redistribution of wealth, which is a Marxist ideology. And so everything about it is Marxist. And of course you want to, soothe those who are in the system itself. But the reality is we need more pastors, more American leaders telling people to get out of the system altogether.
I agree. And of course, flip the script and you've got a teacher who's not a committed Christian and reading off of a script. Let's say that you got the government that comes in and says, no, we don't want you reading that stuff. We don't want you doing the DEI stuff. How many times have we seen teachers cut social media videos that said, well, they said in Texas that we're not going to do this and this and this, but I'm the one who's in control in the classroom and I'm going to teach that. Just try to stop me. And that's the reality. I've talked to people for over 30 years. We decided we're going to homeschool our kids when we had them. And I would have people tell me, I understand it's really bad at the national level. It's really bad at the state level. And I can even see it happening in our county. But, it's not, and maybe even in the same school, but it's not happening in this classroom. I know that teacher. She's great. And I'm not worried at all about my child being there. But then during COVID, they're able to see what was actually happening in the school, and they could see what you're talking about. And that made a big difference with a lot of parents. Now, a lot of them just didn't care, right? They just go along with it. But I think that's why we're seeing the surge of people moving out of the schools and deciding that they're going to educate their kids. So let's talk about that. Let's give people a positive vision of where this goes. Tell us a little bit about how Classical Conversations works and what the goal is and how you accomplish that, those types of things.
Yeah, Classical Conversations was started in my parents' basement in 1997. So I was one of the first 11 students. I was homeschooled through high school. And it was really to empower parents to give their kids a classical Christian education through high school, through homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And also with a idea of helping students go after and seek truth, beauty, and goodness, and to help people ultimately to know God and to make Him known. And so a big difference than what the education system is trying to do. And so we meet once a week with a trained parent tutor, typically in 8 to 12 students per classroom, no more than 12. And they go through all 6 subjects, and then you're homeschooling them at home the rest of the week. But they're coming together and like doing science dissections and debates and mock trials and science fairs and doing poetry jams and things that are more difficult to do alone. But you're doing it in these groups, and we're doing it through a biblical worldview. So everything points back to Jesus. We think 2 + 2 = 4 tells us something about the nature of Jesus. Through a classical model where we're reading the original writings, reading things like the Constitution and Magna Carta and the Federalist Papers and comparing them.
And that's so important, the original writings. I love that you brought that up because it's completely different than somebody's textbook summary of something, isn't it? When you go back and you read the original.
Oh, 100%. And you got to realize all these textbook companies have their own value system as well, and they're not American values; they're collectivist values. And so, they want you to read it through some woke professor's worldview. So that's the worldview that you get it. I mean, we stopped teaching cursive writing, which cursive writing has a lot of. We don't at Classical Conversations. We encourage families to do cursive writing. But they stopped teaching it because they know if the kids don't learn cursive writing, they can't read the Constitution. So that they have to believe whatever some woke professor tells about them. Plus, there's so many benefits of it that just develop brain development and hand-eye coordination from cursive writing. So those things have been super important to us. And so we have a full K-12 program, even college credits available for our students. We have about 2,000 groups in the United States, about 800 international now, over 135,000 students in our programs. And we're helping families every single year, just like yours, to homeschool successfully. And we do that. And we don't have, we don't have any wokeness in our curriculum. It's all, going back and reinforcing, the good and the bad, right? Nobody's perfect, but looking at history through like how does God view history and how does that help us to become human beings that will be flourishing, that can help our communities, help our churches, help our businesses, be entrepreneurs, go to college, go into ministry, all of those things. And so it's been awesome, and we're looking forward to hitting our 30th anniversary next year. But it's totally a different paradigm. Like we don't.
Yeah, it is. And tell me a little bit about now. It sounds like you got a lot more depth into certain subjects and that type of thing. We did a homeschool cooperative with our youngest child, our daughter, when we were in Texas. And it didn't have the kind of depth that you're talking about in some of these things. Is that what your organization, Classical Conversations, helps to provide to move the kids in a more challenging way? What is the difference between, let's say, just a homeschool cooperative where you've got parents who volunteer to teach a particular topic to the group so they can go a little bit more in depth with that topic than they would if they were having to cover everything?
Yeah, so we have a full K-12 curriculum. Most of it has been written by us at this point, but it's written by homeschool parents who've empty nested homeschooled their own kids, written for homeschool parents. And it's written to be done inside a community once a week. And so it's all the subjects, but it's also that help. And so This has been battle tested now with millions of students, over the 29 years, and we are always learning from those students and learning from those families, and then reincorporating it into future versions and trainings into our system. And so it's not, it's a proven roadmap. Like if you ever played the game Oregon Trail growing up, right? You had to select a guide to help you go to Oregon. Well, we're that guide, and we've been to Oregon a million times versus like your typical co-op, great people, but they've never been to Oregon before. They're just trying to, figure it out as they go. And it's better than doing it on your own for sure. But they don't necessarily have a vision for 12th grade or what a high school graduate should look like. But we've seen, tens of thousands of students graduate now. And so we know, like, what are they capable of doing, what works and what doesn't work. And so just imagine, like, millions of years of coaching or millions of years of experience. We sift through all that, pick the best stuff, and then give that to you as a parent. So you're not trying to figure things out, as you go. Of course, you're figuring out, your own kids and your own rhythms and things like that. But, we've got best practices that make it super easy for you to homeschool your kids so you don't have to, one less thing for you to worry about.
That's great. Yeah, because when you're doing it in a cooperative, it's like, okay, so we need somebody to teach X. And it's like, is that me?
Yeah.
I got to go bone up on this stuff now. And so with everything else that's happening in your life, you got to go try to find that in enough depth to teach not only your kids, but other kids as well. That's, I think, a very valuable thing to have that. Having done it the other direction, I can certainly see the value in classical conversations and having that structure that is there. Now, you're not looking to get any grants from the federal government, are you?
No, thank you. No, we federal government, needs to stay out of education, and so we don't want to get involved with them in any way, shape, or form.
Because why? They would come in and they would start altering your curriculum right away, wouldn't they? If they're going to give you the money, they're going to dictate what you teach. That's
that's an iron law of economics. That's the iron law of economics. And so you can't. The medium is the message. And so if the medium is that the government's going to pay for something, that's a collectivist message, especially when it's something the government has no business being involved in. And so it's, of course, students who go through 12 years of collectivist conditioning end up, being bent that direction. But that's what it takes, right? Like it takes $20,000 a year for 12 years to get half of American generation to think collectivism is a good idea. So it just shows you how expensive this worldview is and how contrary to human nature it is, that it takes that level of effort to get the common man to embrace it. And so we have got to stop reinforcing that system as Christians and just get our kids out. And the more we get our own kids out and show people that you're going to live a much more flourishing life, your kids are going to be happier, your family's going to be happier, that living on this consumerism hamster wheel of hedonism that is basically the American culture today, which leads to depression, among many other symptoms of this, is just the rejection of God. And so we need to live our lives as the Bible commands us to live. And it says, teach your children daily my commandments so that they can live a good life. And, we need to get back to that in our country. And we had that for almost 100 years in our country. It wasn't until 1850 where the first public schools initiated, and it wasn't until 1900 was there a public school in every state. And so it's possible to have an educated populace without the government being involved at all. Yeah. And we have almost 125 years of history to prove it.
Yeah, much better educated, as a matter of fact. I wonder how many of the kids in these schools, since they can't even read at grade level, how many of them could read Thomas Paine's Common Sense? Of course, pretty much everybody was reading that back in the day. There was a very, very high literacy rate. And there were no schools involved, except perhaps as like a graduate school or something. Somebody's going to go into a profession, law or medicine or something like that. But it does go against the basic design of God. And we should always expect that there's going to be problems when we do that. God has set up the family, and he has done that in a loving way, and he's done that in a way that really works. And when we decide that we don't want to do it that way. We'd rather have the government do it that way. It's very much like what the Israelites did when they rejected Samuel and they said, we want a king, right? And God said, well, they haven't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me. And so that's the issue, is that parents have rejected what they have that is really a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful experience to be able to teach your kids. And, we had seen this, and we met some wise people who were talking about it as we got into the beginning of this, and they talked about how, well, I've seen that when you have kids that are in school, they get bonded to their teachers, they get bonded to their fellow students in school. But when we teach in homeschooling, they're bonded to their parents. They're bonded to their siblings as much as anything else. And of course, they do get involved with people on the outside. And I could look at that. I could see that in my own life going through a school, that I did get bonded to teachers and to classmates and stuff like that. I didn't have any siblings that were my age, but I could see how that could be the case. And certainly that is. And it's much better to go with God's plan always, isn't it? So.
It always is. And I think that's the part where we need pastors to step up here in this country. I mean, the statistics are horrendous. And so, we've got, Barna says somewhere about 73% or maybe 78% of students who are in church regularly but go to public school are no longer practicing Christians just 2 years after graduating high school. And so,
that's right.
If Jesus told the story of the good shepherd who went after one lost sheep. Well, what happens when you're losing 73 sheep? Pastors should be fearful of what they're going to say in the Bema seat if they have those statistics inside of their, sheep that they're leading. And the same thing with parents. Like, what are you going to say in the Bema seat when God says, "Hey, I gave you these kids. This is one of the most precious gifts I gave you." It says that in the Bible, to raise them in the way they should go. And for 12 years, you turned them over to a godless, atheist education system, contrary to what I commanded you to do.
That's right.
And so many parents have probably never heard it framed that way. And that's because our many pastors in America are more afraid of the teachers' unions than they are of God.
That's right.
And I'm happy for any pastor to challenge me on that and preach the evils of the public school system this upcoming Sunday.
That's right. Yeah, it's so many times it's about filling the pews rather than filling the hearts with truth, isn't it? And and so, yeah, it really is something. It's not just a responsibility of the parents, but it's something that pastors and leaders need to look at this and say, what is happening to us, and why is that happening? They don't seem to want to meet people where they are, and to speak to the issues that are front and center that are directly affecting them. Give people some guidance, some wisdom, some discernment about what they're seeing in their everyday life. Instead, it's kind of like the woman at the well when when Jesus says, well, let's talk about your life here. You're living with this guy you're not married with, and you've had half a dozen other husbands or whatever. And she said, oh, you're a prophet. Let's talk about theology. And she changes the topic. And so it's really easy to talk about theology. It can be very uncomfortable if we talk about our own personal lives, can it? And how that all applies in our own lives. It's much easier, much more comfortable to talk about theology or to talk about prophecy or something like anything other than the stuff that is really killing us.
Yeah, and the good thing is I think more pastors are waking up to this and getting bolder from the pulpit, but that's what we absolutely need. And then business people, like these are your future customers. These are your future employees. Like this system is not helping you out. It is. We are funding a system that is going to turn them against you so that you have higher taxes, more red tape, more headaches, maybe even bankrupt you because you're, not doing the right 3-letter acronym that's in vogue. And so businesses, you need to start scholarships for your kids, employees, or donate to local private schools or help local homeschool co-ops or groups.
I agree.
Give if your employee has a new baby, give them a book about education or teaching your child how to read. Because the nice thing is there's not a complicated answer. It's just parents need to be discipling their kids. They need to be teaching them to read. The state will not teach you to read. They've proven that time and time again. 40 years ago, a parent would have been embarrassed to send their kid to public school without them being able to read well. Nowadays, parents will complain to the public school if their kid doesn't know how to read, but they're not going to do it. You've got to do it yourself. And so it requires sacrifice. And if you can't homeschool today, then start reading with your kid every single night and making sure that they're able to think well and that you're deprogramming them, because they are getting programmed every single day in that public school system.
And I just want to say, too, we look at parenting as a difficult job, no doubt about it. And there are difficult things like changing diapers and stuff like that. But it is the joy of having your child around. And that's what people who've homeschooled miss, is the joy of being able to interact with them that way. And it really can be a joy. So, when you look at this is a job responsibility that's been given to you, but it is a joyful responsibility if you look at that. It's an opportunity to spend time with your children and to have a relationship with them when they get into their teens, because you've been with them when they were younger. And it's about maintaining that relationship. I think that's the key thing. There's work involved in it, but it's one of the most rewarding jobs that you're ever going to have.
Yeah, everything in life that's worth doing is worth doing well. And absolutely, like what have you ever accomplished in life? Like, the harder it was to accomplish, the more satisfaction it was, right?
Yeah.
And you see that over and over again. Even if like lottery winners, right? Lottery winners, they didn't accomplish anything. They have all this money. And what do? They go bankrupt, they get depressed, they commit suicide, like at a significantly higher rate. So they've achieved everything in life with no work, and they're miserable, right? And so we got to also remember that God created work before sin. He gave Adam and Eve jobs to do before sin entered the world.
That's right.
So sin entering the world only made work difficult. Work is actually part of our Imago Dei, a part of our reflection of our Creator. And so part of the reason that the collectivists hate work so much is because they know that that's a reflection of God in us. And that if they are to destroy religion, they need to do everything they can to destroy that reflection. And so that's why they're happy to dumb down the standards, happy to have people that don't work and are on welfare, 24/7, 365 for the rest of their lives, because they know that all that is degrading to their humanity and makes them easier to control in the future based on whatever preferences they have. And so, I think
I agree.
We're living it out.
Yeah, I've interviewed David Bahnsen several times, and he's written books about, your profession, that type of thing, and son of Greg Bahnsen, if people remember, the apologist. And that's the point he made, is that same thing you made. You're the second person I've heard make that point, and it's a very strong and important point. Work is not a curse. Work is part of who we are, being, as you point out, in the image of God. And it's what is the curse is the work being made difficult, which was a result of our rebellion as mankind. But work itself is a very fulfilling thing, and it's something that is in and of itself is good. And so we should not shy away, especially from the work that God has gifted us to do. If God has given you a child, then God will give you the ability to train that child in what they need to know. And there's no question about that. That's what He wants. And there is a tremendous reward in lining yourself up with what God wants. It always works that way, doesn't it? So
it always does.
Yeah. So your website, is it classicalconversations.com or something like that? What is your website?
Yeah, classicalconversations.com. If you go to there and put in your zip code, I will connect you with a local homeschooling parent. Happy to answer any of your questions about classical conversations or just homeschooling in general. So we've got representatives across all 50 states and in many countries around the world as well. And then you can find the book at robertbortons.com or at amazon.com. You can find Woke and Weaponized, How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education and How We Can Win It Back.
That's great. That's great. Well, it's wonderful. I didn't know that your parents started the organization, but that's great that you're continuing the work. It's very important, and I know a lot of people, as I said before, who did classical conversations, and they absolutely loved it. And so I would recommend it based on their experience. We never experienced it, but if I had it to do over again, I'm sure I would go that way. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, our guest is Robert Bortins, and the book is Woke and Weaponized: How Karl Marx Won the Battle for American Education and How We Can Win It Back. That's the key thing. It's not just identifying a problem, but it's coming up with a solution as well. Thank you so much for joining us, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Liberty. It's your move. And now, The David Knight Show.
If you like the Eagles,
On a dark desert highway,
the Cars, and Huey Lewis in the News,
they say the heart of rock and roll is still beating.
you'll love the Classic Hits channel at APS Radio. Download our app or listen now at apsradio.com.
Joining us now is Dan Doyle. He is someone who has decades of experience in the oil industry, has started a couple of companies himself, and he has written some op-ed pieces about what may be happening in Venezuela, what may not be happening in Venezuela. But I thought it'd be very interesting to get a perspective from that. And of course, he knows some petroleum engineers in Venezuela as well. He wrote a joint op-ed piece with a petroleum engineer from Venezuela about what is needed down there. But I think it's also interesting to take a look, step back and take a look at the oil industry itself. And I think that he's got a very interesting personal story as well. He wrote a book of roughnecks and, help me here, Dan, of roughnecks and riches. Yeah, that's the other part we want to make sure we get. It's the riches that are there.
Yeah, well, we hope, right?
Yeah, so that's his book of Roughnecks and Riches, and his name is Dan Doyle. Thank you for joining us, Dan.
Thanks, David. Sure appreciate it.
Tell me a little bit about how somebody who has, saw a little bit about your biography. You're a film school graduate. How did you get into the oil industry? That sounds like a story.
Well, I started in the oil industry. Then I started out with the study geology undergraduate and down at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh. And I was down in Texas drilling wells. So a group of guys from the steel business said, "Hey, here's a young kid. He'll get us started in the oil business." So I went down and I was acting more as a operator than a geologist, but we were drilling outside of Abilene, and it was going well. But then we went into the cyclical decline in the 80s. Mm-hmm. So I'm dating myself, but it was in the 80s.
Well, I remember that time well. Yeah.
Oh, terrible. And we did, it was such a, if you go back into the 70s, a little bit like now, it was a big oil shock. I think there were a couple of them. And everybody got into business. Everybody. The rig count was, in the 79, 80 era, rig count was 5,000. It was all verticals then, so you need a lot of rigs. But everybody was getting into it, all sorts of investor programs. When it's funny when you're looking over an area, especially out west now, you see all these wells that were drilled back during this time. And it was just sort of a boom. And when the boom came off is about when I was getting started. And gradually oil price, a good price then was 25, but it was trickling down and down and down. And finally it was a bust. And I waited around Texas for a year or so. A young guy, are we going to go or not go? What should we do? Finally, there was nothing left. I moved back home to the Pittsburgh area, and a friend of mine, kind-hearted friend of mine, started giving me work producing his commercials. So whatever, something to do, And so I'm doing that, and I'm thinking, oh man, I could do this for a living if oil never comes back. And so I ended up at NYU's New York University's graduate film school, and I kicked around in the movie business for a while. Had some success, as at Sundance, that kind of thing. Had an agent and all that, but it wasn't for me. I just, the sleeping on floor things, and ideologically, I probably was a misfit.
Oh yeah.
And and so met some great people though, and eventually I started I thought, okay, enough. So I scrapped together with little money I had and didn't have, and started a rental company up. And I started buying equipment and renting it out to movies and commercials and a little bit of construction work, and got into cameras and generators. We got pretty big, and I used that to leverage my way then to get finally back in the oil business.
Wow.
And that was to start a frac company. And it just absolutely went off the rails. It was just the worst time because, just the same way that, the 79, 80 boom pushed a bust that I got caught up in. Now I got caught up. I started this in 2008, the frac company. I got caught up in the global financial, recession, and where the banks were failing and Too Big to Fail, great book, the Andrew Ross Sorkin, and got caught up in that. And it was just a son of a bitch, excuse me, but trying to get this thing going.
I bet.
And just craziness. Guy pulls a knife on me in a trailer, and he's my builder. So I just gave just crazy. And then these crazy partners, and I'd written scripts to make a little bit of money, and I started thinking, my God, I think I'm living a movie. And so I started taking notes, and eventually got around to writing the book. And so that came out a couple months ago, but it's called Up Roughnecks and Riches, a startup in the Great American Fracking Boom.
Well, and of course, one of your reviewers said it was a rollicking ride, and that was a Wall Street Journal review that you had. I imagine just from that little bit of a taste that we had there, I imagine it is a rollicking ride to find out how you got into that. If you started a couple of companies and you did it successfully, I'm sure that you wouldn't have fit in with the film crowd. That's
no.
It was a different kind of culture, I think, completely.
I get a kick out of, and I like a lot of these guys, but I get a kick out of, the awards. There's always somebody patting someone on the back, or always an award. It's always about their bravery. But in the film business, you're in such an echo chamber. It's like you're just agreeing with everybody. These films that get these kind of accolades, or these directors or writers, or producers. And truthfully, the real courage would be a conservative trying to make a movie in Hollywood. There's not a chance. As soon as you go there, I'm a big fan of James Woods. I loved his movies. And,
it'd be like Oil and Water, wouldn't it?
yeah. But there's a guy that just shot himself in the head when he came out with his own opinions because they just won't have him, and he knew it.
Yeah,
he knew it. But, and he was a great actor.
Well, when I look at the Oscars and things like that, what it reminds me of are these cliques that you used to see in high school, when they'd vote for people for prom queen and that type of thing. It is a popularity contest, and it seems like you succeed in that if you're going to try to appease everybody's feelings and flatter them and that type of thing. So, if you're about something that's serious and literal, that would be a difficult ride to hoe. I remember the 80s, and, interestingly enough, Dan, my wife and I, we went to, our first job was with Texas Instruments in Houston. And so we got there as everything was blowing up in 1980, and it was a boom town. And then we got kind of tired of it. We wanted to move back home. And then we couldn't couldn't sell our home. I mean, it was just everything was in free fall.
Sure.
It was collapsing. It was amazing what happened to it. You know, the boom and the bust cycles that happened with that. But of course, we've seen that a lot with the oil industry itself. I mean, when you look at the boom with the OPEC embargo and everything, you saw oil go up. And I've talked about this a lot on my show in terms of what's going on with the Strait of Hormuz right now, with just that partial oil embargo. It was only against OPEC's oil to the United States. We saw the price of oil quadruple. And so, you know, it's you know, we look at it and, you know, if something like that is going to happen now, of course, there's a lot of other variables here. And that's one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was Venezuela and what's going to happen there. One of the things that just happened this week, Trump started floating the idea of making Venezuela the 51st state. And I guess Canada was
52nd. Don't forget to get Canada.
Yeah, that's right. I guess he forgot about Canada in the meantime. Yeah. So. Sure. And where does Greenland fit in? Are they number 53?
Oh, I don't know.
Maybe Trump's going to get in the flag business, you know?
Yeah. Trump land. You know, I get it, though. I kind of, actually, I'm just, you know, I write these pieces and I'm just about to give one to the publicist. I'll send it out today. And I don't know where it lands. You know, they shop it around. But what it's about is, you know, he is, you know, love him or hate him, wherever you stand, he is sort of in the beginnings of remaking the global oil industry and really where we buy our oil and gas. You know, we consume 20 million barrels a day of crude. And I know we like to say, oh, we consume everything we have. But, you know, that's kind of a, you're taking BTU equivalencies from natural gas production. And that's not, you know, it kind of is true. But truthfully, we need 20 million barrels of crude. And if you look, you know, I don't know if it was by plan or what, but Trump comes in, he's talking drill, baby, drill. And that was the campaign rhetoric. You know, really, we were going into kind of a rig count free fall, not free fall, but it was really coming down because oil prices were really bad. So we were in a bust in February. And by about the 5th of March, we're in a boom because of Iran. And the beginnings will probably be a boom. And so you know, but there's the administration's done a lot to help U.S. producers, and we're taking advantage of some of that stuff to do with BLM spacings and surface facilities and all that. And it's really helpful. So he's kind of changing the bias from what it was in the Biden administration to oil on instead of oil off through the federal. So you have that, and then you have Venezuela. And Venezuela, at best, was, you know, 3 million barrels a day back when Nixon was president, you know, and it's down to, you know, about 1 million barrels a day. And it's kind of funny because I was visiting a friend at Colorado School of Mines, a professor, and I'm looking around for him. And I walk into an office, and it's another professor, and we just start talking. He's from Venezuela, and his wife worked on Lake Maracaibo for the Chinese. And we start talking, and I get a call from the publicist for the book, and she says, "Hey, I need a story on Venezuela." I go, "What do I know about Venezuela?" She goes, "Can you find someone?" And I'm like, I'm sitting with this guy, Louis Zerpa, who's a PhD, you know, professor, and I'm like, "Louis, are you from Venezuela?" He goes, "Yeah." I go, "Hey, you want to write an article?" He goes, "Yeah, sure, man. Let's write an article." So he provided the insight from, you know, hands-on in Venezuela and talked about the Rinco, I'm probably not pronouncing it right, you know, the super heavy oils. But what's going to happen down there is Chris Wright is doing a great job. I really think highly of Chris Wright. Anybody in the oil business thinks highly of Chris Wright, the U.S. Energy Secretary. He started a couple companies, but the big one was Liberty, and it's a frac company, but it's a little more than that. And it's a bunch of really smart guys like himself, an MIT engineer, that put this together. And anyways, Wright is down in, you know, is I don't mean physically, but he's pushing. The first thing to do is we get the diluents that are needed that were kind of embargoed out of, or sanctioned out of the picture. And those diluents immediately boosted that production by a couple hundred barrels a day. And now I'm hearing that Exxon, if you remember Darren Wood's comment, it's uninvestable when all the majors, the CEOs of the majors got together at the White House.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah.
You know, he kind of broke ranks and said, "Hey, it's uninvestable." Now I'm hearing Exxon's put low sulfur crudes, but the refineries need some of that heavier stuff that comes out of Alberta or out of Venezuela or out of. But hopefully you can hear me. There's someone mowing the lawn outside.
Oh yeah, sounds fine.
But we so anyways, collectively, you round up all this North and South American production and we're about 18 million barrels, and then you start adding in some other stuff. Maybe Trump's doing something here, and to his point, let everyone else fix the Hormuz Strait. You know, the Europeans and Japan and China that are using it, because ultimately what we end up with is regionalism in the oil market rather than globalism. And so instead of us buying, crudes from overseas, we just keep it, regionally. We keep it here. Canada, we import about 4 million barrels a day. Alaska, Trump is opening Alaska up. Hilcorp is a big part of Alaska. You know, Jeff Hildebrand, another self-made, guy like Harold Hamm. And very big. He now owns the Alaska Pipeline, his company. And so with all this going on, it takes a long time to build production, but we're sort of really truly knocking at that energy independence, moniker. That kind of getting there. I mean, that's a really simple way to address a really complex problem, because oil flows everywhere. It's a real network coming and going, and refinery capacity, everything else. But in the simplest of terms, numbers, we're getting with our production, Canadian production, and South American production, we're pretty close. Friendly nation production, let's call it. We're pretty close to what we need to be self-sufficient.
Well, let me ask you about that, because when we get people like Biden and these people who want to just keep it in the ground, they say, right?
Yeah.
And they are hell bent on, no matter what it costs, they want to shut down the production of oil. And so there's a political component to this. Even if we get this all of this stuff running, they may wind up shutting it down at a later point in time. And that kind of brings us back to Venezuela. You know, how much of the problems that we see in Venezuela, and they're sitting on a massive amount of oil compared to any other country, and yet they